In an article sponsored by the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, Richard Conniff, scientist and author, brought up an interesting dilemma facing conservationists today. Conniff writes, "The concept of pricing ecosystem services and allowing them to be bought and sold has gained wide acceptance amongst conservationists in recent years. But does this approach merely obscure nature's true value and put the natural world at even greater risk?" This is an interesting question to tackle. But before we do, we must understand what an ecosystem service is. An ecosystem service is any positive benefit that wildlife or ecosystems provide us, people. For instance, when water is retrieved from a well, it has been purified without human interaction. Our soil and the living organisms and non-living material within it absorb the nutrients within our wastewater, thereby filtering the water so we can reuse it as if it's been untouched. Our ecosystem does all the work. Of course, now we have septic systems and biofilters to help our ecosystem perform its natural service, but these wastewater treatment plants are only necessary because of our growing population and waste levels. The reason wastewater treatment plants and other technologies exist are to preserve these vital ecosystem services. Destroying such services can take a tremendous toll on economies and spark scary ripple effects that require expensive remedies. That being said, humans function through instant gratification. So if harming the environment temporarily can reel in profits, most wouldn't think twice. This is why philosophical and scientific arguments rarely trump industrialization. It's hard to convince people that these gifted services are more important than money and jobs, especially when they haven't been completely destroyed or have not yet affected individual lives. Take the issue of air quality, for example. It's easier to convince someone in Beijing, China, whose air quality index is an atrocious 159 and on some days is subsequently forced to stay locked inside their homes, that air pollution from factories needs to be immediately dealt with, than to convince someone from New York whose AQI is only 62. With that in mind, conservationists have made a strong effort to point out the marketplace value of ecosystem services. Disregarding the intrinsic value of our ecosystems, highlighting the monetary value was initially a way to remind people what can be lost in the process of instant gratification. The problem is that mere awareness of these issues cannot save our ecosystems from our destruction, until someone came up with the brilliant idea of making it possible for people to buy and sell these services. The idea of PES, Payment for Ecosystem Services, is to achieve a conservationist goal by allowing people the benefits of profits. The idea seems genius, almost too good to be true. Well, it's certainly a clever idea, but like everything else, it has its criticisms. The main criticisms to PES are pricing and power. How does one determine the price of flood control, water filtration, carbon sequestration, and species habitats, name a few? And how do we determine who has the right to ownership and sell? In developing countries, for instance, indigenous communities may lack the political strength to assert ownership. Environmental injustice will only radically increase. Kent Redford, an environmental consultant, says that the first mistake is to assume that old-style conservation methods have failed. In fact, they're the reason that state-sponsored protected areas now cover 27% of the land in Costa Rica, 30% in Tanzania and Guatemala, and 48% in Germany. The idea of buying and selling ecosystem services may simply be another transfer of power to corporations and the rich. But how then do we convince people of the value of our ecosystems? Do we simply stick to old-style conservation methods, or is PES a viable solution?
Created using Powtoon.